Hello, my name's Julien. I'm from Germany, but I work in London and I train Perl developers. I'm here today to talk to you about turning humans into developers, and I do that using Perl. If you want to learn Perl right now, you're in the wrong room. Those classes were 2 days ago, I think, so that's not what we're going to talk about today. Instead, I'm going to ask some questions. So who of you is a developer? Just raise your hands. Okay, just leave them up and now tell me, who of you trained as a developer? Okay, some hands go down. Who did that not at university? That's, okay, any Germans? No? That's good, interesting, thank you. So, what I did is an apprenticeship in Germany, which is a bit different from an apprenticeship in the UK. Essentially, it's a 3-year thing where you first find a company and they hire you, and then they teach you stuff, and at the same time you go to a vocational school and you work and you gradually grow in your career. There are a couple of different types of tech jobs that you can do in Germany with that. There are developers, admins, stuff with cables, stuff with telecom, and technical salespeople. And I think the most important thing to mention here is that you do not get to choose your technology stack. So usually you're happy to find the company that hires you, and then you end up doing Perl, like me. Or not. Well, anyway. So I'd like you to just take a moment and think back to your very first day on your first tech job ever. What did you do there? And now tell me, did you like your second day? Were you looking forward to it? Okay, I see nodding heads. Some not so much. So let me tell a story. On my very first day, that was actually an internship before I started the apprenticeship, so 2 months before, same company. I set up my computer, and then at some point a colleague came in. He said, I have this piece of HTML, it's a competitor website, I need the prices. Can you write a function that takes this HTML and returns an array of prices? So screen scraping. And I'd read about half of the Learning Perl books, so I wrote some regex, which is always good to, no, maybe not, but it worked, and it took me half a day, and I gave him the code, and he said, okay, this is fine, I'll put it into production. And I was like, oh, wow, on my very first day, this is awesome. So 2 months later, I went to vocational school, and at that point, I was doing my own projects and pushing to production myself, and the guy next to me, he says, you know, I'm really excited, they already let me write websites. Like, okay, I must have picked a good company. This is cool. Right, so let me talk about mentoring. I'm going to talk about mentoring and training, and I'm going to determine what the differences are in my opinion. But mentoring first. So what are your roles as a mentor? There are several of them. First and foremost, you're a trainer, yeah? So you tell them stuff, and you teach them stuff. You're a teacher. But you're also a manager. And I think a manager is something different from a boss. As the manager, you assign them tasks. As the boss, that sounds a bit harsher. That's when they do something wrong and you need to tell them off. Yeah, it's not the best hat to wear, but it's something you need to do. You're also their role model, which is basically you show them how to be and how to do things. Because if you're always late, they're not gonna really care about being in the office on time. Then you are a motivator, because motivation is really key. That's the most important thing to have for probably any of us, whether you're learning or just working, or actually you're doing all of that at the same time. But motivation is the most important thing that you need to work on someone. And sometimes you have to be a parent. You might end up working with someone who's just straight out of school. So yeah, once in a while you need to teach them about life as well. And probably that's one of the most important. You want to be their friends, because that builds trust. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later on. But how do I do that? So the most important thing is be available. And that can be as simple as, you know, you give them a task and you tell them, if you have a question, I sit over there. It's okay to come over, even if I wear my headphones. They're just because this other guy's keyboard is so loud. Just tap me on the shoulder or shoot me with an Nerf gun or whatever. Just come over, ask questions. I'm here. It's not like a problem. And even if I'm next door, you can always come over. You want to lead by example, which goes hand in hand with the role model. So if you want them to write clean code, you'd better do that yourself. Otherwise, they'll never learn. And you don't just want to tell them what to do. You want to teach them how to help themselves. You just don't answer the question. You show them how to research the answer. You show them how to ask the right question. All of those tricks. Teach a man to fish. That's quite important. And at the same time, you need to know when you want to not help, because it's way better to let them figure stuff out themselves. You want this aha effect, this, oh, I got it. And that's when the real learning sets in. You want to give them responsibility, because nothing's more boring than getting everything cut and chewed for you. So the further they progress, the more things they should be able to do by themselves. You do that by building rapport. So you get to know them, you invest into your relationship with them, because they're people, right? They're not just young developers or untrained developers, they're people that you're interacting with. So learn more about them than just their name. And you, of course, also share about yourself. I mean, that can be, even if you're an introvert, you can still ask them what you do on the weekend, and I worked on this code, or maybe I went and saw that movie. But that builds trust, and trust is good, because then they ask you more questions, and they're actually not afraid to come and ask for your opinion. So let's talk about motivation. Those are tickets from an actual job I worked for, like the trainee project we did in my previous company. So yeah, their work matters. That's the most important thing about motivation. Make them feel that what they do is actually useful. And even if you can't let them work on production, because maybe it's too complicated or the current customer doesn't allow it, you can find something else that is productive for them to do. Don't just give them example tasks and just like throw them away when they're done. That's the worst thing that can happen to you. You don't want to. I mean, I personally don't enjoy doing tutorials just for the sake of doing tutorials. Why should I assume that any of my trainees would like to do that? So I prefer giving them actual stuff to do. But you still need to train them, right? So mix it. In the beginning, there's going to be a lot of, well, probably a bit boring reading of books or doing tutorials, but there should always be this shared time between the two. So what I like to do is kind of like get a book or get a tutorial and tell them half the day you do this, but you show me the things you've did, like the exercises you've completed, and here's a simple ticket for you to work on for the other half of the day. Because that way it doesn't get boring. You get this context switch. And I think that's good for motivation. So do that. And then afterwards, tell them that they did something well. Because if you actually acknowledge their accomplishments, they'll know about the fact that they did well. Otherwise, they might not know. It's not enough to just not tell them off if they did something wrong. It's just you can't assume that not being angry with them is, yeah, you did well. Just tell them, this is nice, I like what you did there. Good job. Right, so training. The other half of the thing is training. What defines a developer? I mean, I think we've all got different views on what a developer or programmer is. So I think there are hard skills and there are soft skills involved. The hard skills are pretty obviously like programming, Perl in our case mostly, and data structures and databases, and there's a little bit of project management. There are tools like version control and ticket systems. Maybe there's Jira in the mix, there's GitHub, there's stuff like that, and then there's the actual tool chain, like unit testing and Jenkins and release management and all of that and all of the process around it. That's the things, yeah, you need to know and you need to be able to do. But on the other side, there are also soft skills, like thinking is probably a good one for developers. You want them to be able to think independently and to challenge certain things. Like when you get a ticket that comes from a different department, and yeah, sometimes that doesn't make a lot of sense. I think we've all been there. You don't want them to just do it. You want them to question, why am I doing this? And you want them to be curious about that and take a moment and step back and research what is this about, and what is this technology about? Is this actually the right tool to use, and how do I get this to work? Look at code, look at the underlying things. That's kind of big for developers to have, I think, and it's one of the things I look for most when I hire trainees. Curiosity. It's one of those non-technical skills that are really important. So professionalism is another one. If you have someone who's come straight out of university or straight out of school, they might not have had another job before. So there is some office etiquette, and how do I write emails? How do I talk to people in other departments? What shouldn't I wear to the office? It sounds really stupid, but some of them might not know this because they've never done it before. So tell them and show them and be the example. Yeah, sometimes writing an email is really hard. I remember how I sat in front of my Outlook for half an hour writing a 3-sentence email, and it was probably sweating when I hit the send button because is this person actually going to like what I wrote? And probably they responded yes and nothing else. So that's professionalism. Then there's playing well with others. Mostly in job adverts it says, at least in German, it says a word about like being able to work in a team. And yeah, while we don't always do that, like half the time we probably sit and hack code into our computer, we do need to be able to talk to others, and we do need to be able to do code reviews, and we need to do retrospectives and stand-ups and all of those things, and we might just need to be nice to each other. That's something that you can't just like learn in a day, but that just comes through the culture, and you need to live that and lead with the example again. Then there's how to ask questions. I've already mentioned that. Being able to ask for the right things is incredibly important. And not a lot of people know that without actually having learned it. So if you look at Stack Overflow or other pages, then often the questions are very broad because people who write them don't have the skill yet to figure out what they actually want to do or how to put that in words. And that's also not something you just like pick up in a day, and it comes through the years of training that you go through basically most of your life. And then there's the business knowledge. Now that's an interesting one because that's very specific usually to your company or to the field that your company works in. So that one also needs to be picked up on the way, and it's not really, it's sometimes transferable, but it's all of these specific company things like words they use, abbreviations they use, the slang, the how does our product work? What is our business model? Why do we do this? How do we make money? It's important. Even if you just write a little bit of front-end code, just in quotes, you still need to know this because you have to identify with your company. So all of the business knowledge is incredibly important. How do we keep track of those things, though? So I believe in a couple of regular meetings. So when I get someone for a short amount of time, then I usually do a kickoff meeting to get to know them. That's kind of the first thing I do. Schedule a meeting, schedule it in advance, sit down with them, talk about their expectations, tell them my expectations, set down some goals, get the essentials out of the way. When should you be here in the office? It's like, if you want to start really early and we have flexible time, that's fine, but please don't come so early that I'm not going to be here for 3 more hours. It's not because I don't want you to start early. It's because I think in the beginning we should have some overlap in our time. So you need to set these expectations in the beginning. Then I do regular feedback talks, kind of like, how do you feel right now? Is everything working? Do you like what you're doing? Is there any criticism you have? Do I talk too much? Am I not present? Are the tasks boring? Do you want to do something else? All of those. And then there's ticket analysis, obviously. So when you give them a task, you sit down with them and explain. And I'm going to get into that in a bit later in the talk. And then there's, at least if they wander off to another department, there's a final feedback or evaluation where you basically go over all the things they've learned and how they've done, and you give them a recommendation on what they should focus on in the future. Yeah, about meetings and feedback talks. So the most important thing is you announce them early. It's not like my office now. That's really bad. And none of us want to be in that position. So schedule them early, book a room, go away from the team, close the door, and actually sit down and talk about this stuff and let them know in advance what they should be expecting and what you want them to think about before you actually have the talk. Then always remember that feedback is a two-way street. So nothing is worse than just like pushing stuff down on them and telling them what they need to improve. No, you wanna also know how maybe you are doing the wrong things so they don't actually learn something. Ask them about that and listen to their opinion, and never blame them. Find solutions, figure out a way to solve issues, but don't just tell them they did something wrong. There's this rule of two where there's always an apprentice and a master, or well, a senior developer maybe, but there's also the rest of the team. So there's not only those two. So if there are more developers, make them part of the whole thing, even if you're the designated mentor. They can talk to anyone. There's a whole team, and everyone is hopefully approachable in the company. At the same time, you want to be part of their team. If there are several new people, they will probably bond together because they're all maybe a bit younger than the rest of the team. They're all new at the same time. Try to still be part of that team as well, because you want to be approachable for all of the ones that are new, even if they're not in your immediate team or in your department. Right, technical skills. Version control, Perl basics, and frameworks are probably the most obvious hard skills. Don't reinvent the wheel on them. You can't just have actual teaching sessions. That's a waste of time. There are good books on them. There are good tutorials on them. There might not be many in the Perl world, but there are some really good ones. And in my slides, there are going to be some examples of the ones I use at the end. And then there's code reviews, and there's whiteboard and stuff. Sometimes I do that. I just grab a room and I start drawing diagrams, and that works incredibly well. The whiteboard, the code review we're going to talk about in a minute. And pair programming, I think, is something that most of us know how to do, especially at these conferences. But the same thing is in the office. And just don't just go there and hack everything into their computer. Give them some time to actually figure out the problem by themselves, but be there to support. Right, code review. This is a bit of DBX classish code that I've seen in the past. And I looked at that and I was like, so this is not bad, but it could be improved. So this was the person who wrote this was in their 3rd month of learning programming, or in their 4th, I believe. But really new to Perl, really new to DBX class. What do we see here? Okay, we want to figure out how many talks there are. So yeah, we start with a count, we iterate all of them, we increment. This is good. This is not they could have just used count, but they might not have known about it, they might not have found the documentation yet. So they actually went and applied that knowledge of how a loop works. For someone who's just learning programming, this is really good. This is not, why didn't you just use the count method? So encourage thinking and tell them what they did well, but that they could actually make it better by doing this instead. And then they learn. This is not bad. And I might not even tell them about the count method here. I might just say, remember I told you about this environment variable, debug trace. Maybe you want to try that one again, and you'll see how you can maybe improve this. Just read the SQL it spits out. And that probably works. Right, so how do you develop a developer? This is a screenshot of a ticket management system where in the past I used a specific project for the trainees to work on. And every trainee that came into that department in the previous company I worked at would work on this project. So I think visualizing tickets, even if the rest of the company doesn't do that, is really good. And if you don't have a ticket system, use sticky notes on the wall. Those work, just so they know where they're at. I think if it's visualized, it's really a lot easier to keep track of what they're doing, and it gives a sense of achievement if you actually go and move a ticket to done, which is really nice. Then try to come up with user stories, because simple technical tickets are often harder to understand. Formulate them into something that is more graspable, and keep track of them. That way, you can really give them this like a path to growing, and you start really slow with very tiny pieces. Change a bit of style here, add a bit of output there, and then it gets bigger and bigger over time. But it cannot happen overnight. It takes a lot of time to actually come to a point where you can do a lot more. Right, I promised Perl. Yeah, but there isn't really Perl in this talk. There was a little bit of code. So what I do to get them involved in Perl and in the community is I encourage them to participate in IRC, which is always good. I encourage them to read the CPAN, not only the documentation, but also the code. So that often helps, and I think a lot of us in this room have probably learned a lot by doing that, by reading other people's code. I like to answer questions on Stack Overflow, and I like to encourage people to do that, because by answering things that you don't know about, you actually learn a lot. The pull request challenge is always a good thing. And finally, I tend to take them to conferences because you guys are awesome, and this is probably the best way to get motivated. Thank you very much. So I might have time for a question or two. Before that, I just want to say we just hired at my new employer, Olio. We just hired our first trainee developer. I hope he's watching. This is cool. Next time you're coming. So yeah, are there any questions? We don't actually have any time for questions. That is a shame. Find me in the hallway. I am very approachable. Thank you.